Hey everyone, I'm Jeff St. Pierre, and this is episode 167 of the Adult Education Podcast. Today we're diving into the Fast and Furious franchise with journalist and author Barry Hertz. I will never forget the moment. It was 2011. I'm sitting in a packed movie theater sweating as my adrenaline was pumping through my veins. Some of my favorite movie characters found themselves in a tight spot and were likely to be arrested for their long list of crimes. On the screen, though, there are two of the biggest action movie stars of the 2000s, and they're about to fight. This is what the fans of the Fast and Furious franchise have been waiting for since the first trailer for Fast 5. Vin Diesel and The Rock start to battle it out, and the entire theater was captivated. When the first Fast and the Furious film hit the theaters, it took everyone by surprise. This relatively low-budget action film dominated the box office and became a cultural phenomenon. It spawned a couple of sequels that didn't quite live up to the expectations. Most people thought the franchise might have died on the streets of Tokyo, but that's not where our story ends. A fourth film was put together and it reignited the fan base. Fast 5 in 2011, though, changed everything, not just in the Fast and Furious franchise, but it sent waves through the entire movie industry. And here we are, more than 2 decades after the first film came out, and we've seen 10 Fast movies hit the theaters, and the fans are anxiously waiting for what is expected to be the final installment. Whether you're a fan of the Fast movies or not, I think you'll find this conversation interesting. Canadian journalist and author Barry Hertz just published a book that takes us through all of the twists and turns of the franchise. It's called Welcome to the Family, the explosive story behind Fast and Furious, the blockbusters that supercharged the world. I really enjoyed speaking with Barry. These movies have been some of my favorites over the years, though I will openly admit that there have also been a couple of big misses in the franchise too. This book is more than just the movies. It shares the stories behind the scenes, from how the first film came to life to what might be holding up the final installment. Now, before I share this conversation, I just want to mention that I spoke with Barry a day or two after the World Series ended, which is why our chat begins with a little bit of baseball talk. Barry, how are you?
Good. How are you, Jeff?
I'm doing great. I am so excited for this conversation. I can't even express to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I should ask you, I think you live in Toronto, right? So how are you doing now?
I do. Oh, I'm fine. I'm not, I'm not a huge sports guy, so I was on the bandwagon like everybody else, for sure.
As you should be.
So yeah. Civic pride. I was able to recover pretty quickly. I watched the game and I was, going like this the entire time, but it was a tough one. It would have been good for the city. But,
As a baseball fan, I had two feelings. One, it was very exciting just to see how the series shaped up, because you just don't get excitement like that, ties and come from behind victories and game 7 and extra innings.
Yeah.
I mean, it was everything you could possibly ask for in a World Series.
Yeah.
But then also I'm like, I really wanted the little guy to win, so to speak. Like, I really wanted someone to take down the Dodgers. So I was kind of bummed about that. But you know what? You can't win everything.
I know you can't. It was like the perfect script. It was a perfect movie script, just without that ending.
Which leads us right into our conversation today, because we're going to talk about movies.
There you go.
And 10 of them, as a matter of fact. We might not get through all 10 here today, but we're talking about the Fast and Furious franchise. You've written this amazing book called Welcome to the Family, the explosive story behind Fast and Furious, the blockbusters that supercharged the world. I will say my first thought about it was gutsy move to print it before they finalized the whole series, but I love seeing the build up to where we may go from here,
Right. Yeah. I mean, when I had started the book, or I had the initial idea, I thought, okay, it'd be great to get this out in time for the sequel, because, the Fast X came out in the summer of 2023 and ended on a literal cliffhanger. Like, there were lives dependent on the fate of a cliff. And I was like, okay, knowing the production schedule of these films, I'm pretty sure, if I get my act together and things all kind of click just right, we can either get it, just as the movie might be releasing, or just afterward while, it hits the home entertainment market. So people are talking about it still. And as I discovered while working on it, that was not going to be the case.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, it just seems like, we can get into this a little bit later in the conversation, but it just seems like there's so much going on with this series, and they just don't seem to have a clear exit strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of kind of different factors at play, but it is, the book is then kind of coming out at an accidentally great timing, because this is kind of like we're in a limbo period here, which is a little bit unprecedented for this big and this on long running of a franchise, where we have just like frozen it in time for an indeterminate amount of time while fans are on tenterhooks, and we just have no idea what is going to come next, really.
Well, let's go back to the early days, because this first movie, The Fast and the Furious, that came out in 2001. I was 20 years old when that came out. And I'll tell you, even to this day, if I drive by an 18-wheeler on the highway, my first thought is, I wonder if I can fit underneath it. Like, I wonder if I could get from side to side. It changed the game in so many ways for especially people that would be in my age range at the time, like that sort of like 16 to 25-year-old range. I mean, this was the god tier movie of that era.
Yeah, totally. And it was the exact same for me. I remember when I first saw it, I was working at a movie theater in high school. And that summer, I must have seen that film in bits and pieces, cumulatively like 2 dozen times, and having sat through it, from start to finish a couple times as well. And yeah, there was something just about it, that kind of sex appeal, of course, of like, hot girls and fast cars and, big huge guys doing crazy stuff. And as a teenager, like I was not a rule breaker in the slightest. I was very good little kid, very obedient, had my part-time job, very responsible. But there was something about those films that spoke to that irresponsibility that you kind of long for at a distance. And I really just latched onto it. And I watched it many, many times. But then, you kind of forget it. You kind of forgot about it. It's like, okay, on to the next thing. Like, it was a nice big summer hit. But then as the years went on and the series just got increasingly crazier, both in like the amount of action that it was doing and the approach that it was taking in terms of characters and timelines and, off-screen drama bleeding into on-screen drama. It felt like, oh my gosh, how did this little car racing movie like evolve into this mega billion-dollar behemoth?
It's interesting to hear you say that you saw the movie, you really enjoyed it, but then eventually you kind of moved on to the next thing. And I remember like it spoke to a certain piece of the audience that really hadn't been spoken to before. And when you have like niche, when you have I don't want to call it a niche film because obviously it was a blockbuster, but when you have a niche thing where you're talking about people that soup up their cars, that race their cars on the weekends. I grew up in an area north of Boston that had a significant amount of Puerto Rican and Dominican folks living there. And the souped up car thing was real. It was a legit thing in my era. You saw them going down the streets all the time. So it was kind of interesting to see from that cultural standpoint how that film impacted all of these people, because I do think that it gave them a moment where they were like, wow, we're seen. Like, this is our community. This is our culture that we're seeing on the big screen for the very first time, really.
Yeah, completely. And I think, there's a great story that I recount in the book about that first test screening of the first film that the studio had. And it amped up that audience so much that they were just going out in the parking lot and revving their engines. They may not have had, those souped up kind of rides, but for a moment they thought that they could, or that was the life that they were now going to lead. And it was very important for the filmmakers of the first movie to reflect that car culture, to, accurately portray it both as in its like diversity and its technological innovations, and like, really seriously, get under the hood, for lack of a better term.
Also, what was really unique about it that I hadn't really put my finger on until, reading the book here was the diversity of the cast in the movie. And not even just the first one, even moving through all of the movies. Yeah, Paul Walker was this sort of like, the typical blonde hair, blue eye American white boy. But he was a lot of times the only white boy in the movies. Like it was all a diverse cast of people throughout this series. And I think that's pretty interesting because you didn't see that so much, especially in dynasty films like this and things that go on for so long. You didn't see that diversity in the cast.
Yeah, and it felt like they were doing, diversity before diversity was like a watchword in Hollywood,
Sure.
right? Like it felt very organic. It felt very natural to the story and the world that they were trying to develop and portray. And yeah, it's interesting because, the first film was built as a star vehicle for Paul Walker. And then you just kept adding more and more people to it, and you expand that diversity across the board, and it's appealing to those markets without, crassly targeting them. It never felt like this is like going to be, a black movie, or this is going to be a Hispanic movie. This is a movie for everybody, and the kind of diversity and ethnicity of the crew, of the Dom Toretto crew reflects that. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't even matter necessarily the color of your car. It just means, can you drive that car fast?
I did think it was interesting. You mentioned it was a vehicle for Paul Walker. There was a line where the very first director, Rob Cohen, asked Paul Walker during The Skulls, when they were making that movie together, what is your dream project? And I think the quote in your book was something where he played an undercover cop who could flash his badge, shoot a gun, get the girl, and drive a fast car. And boy, did they nail that.
Yeah. I mean, he gave them pretty specific instructions there, and they delivered on all those fronts.
I also love, and I had never thought about this until I read the term in your book a couple of different times. The movie, the first one, and then we can move on to the later things in this series, but the first one, it seemed revolutionary in the action and the portrayal of the cast and the different things that you were seeing, because you hadn't seen a lot of that before in movies, or at least in that way. But the movie itself is not exactly breaking any ground. Like, you reference Point Break a few different times in your book, and now that I'm looking back, I'm like, it's literally the same exact story as Point Break. Like, all you're missing is the Nick Nolte character, really.
Yeah. I mean, and the filmmakers and certainly the studio were very aware of the Point Break comparisons. And I mean, so was director Rob Cohen. I mean, he filmed the pivotal scene in Fast and Furious at Neptune's Net, that Malibu seafood restaurant, which is very prominently featured in Point Break.
Yes, it is.
So, nobody was exactly playing coy here. And, but, as the series evolved, of course, that Point Break element really kind of dropped off. And it's also curious to know, for the first 45 minutes of the first movie, we're not sure like what is going on, like in terms of allegiances. It's not revealed that Paul Walker's character, Brian O'Connor, is an undercover cop until almost an hour into the movie, when he's kind of pulled off to the side of the road, taken by Ted Levine's character to that house in Beverly Hills. And then finally the shoe drops that he's actually a cop.
Yeah, they did a really good job kind of weaving that in. I do want to take a look moving forward here, because there's so much in this book, and we're definitely not going to cover everything, because it's just, 400 pages about the Fast and Furious franchise is an undertaking for sure. And I love we're not going to get through that in our interview here today. But I think it's interesting how the movie was a hit, clearly, but it became a bigger hit when it hit the video market, the DVD market. And, when you look back in time, there's a lot of movies that had that element in that era. It's like, once it hit DVD, it, like, Bring It On is a big one, I think, just that's coming off the top of my head. Like, it did fine in the movie theaters, but when it hit DVD, it was like, wow, we really had something special with this. So I think that's interesting to look back on this and realize the Fast and Furious may not have had a number 2 if it hadn't have been for this massive DVD market.
Completely. And I think so many movies from that era, from that early aughts era, would not have existed into like franchisable runs were it not for that home entertainment market. I mean, back then, that was, pure found money for the studios. Like, we're talking, hundreds of millions of dollars. Certainly on DVD, the Fast and the Furious outgrossed its theatrical run by several margins. And now with the streaming era, that source of revenue has all been taken away. And a lot of you're seeing, that's why a lot of studios are kind of in panic mode right now, because there's just it's not commensurate with what they used to be making in that DVD era.
It's interesting you say that, because there was a moment last year where I was like, wow, okay, there is still something here for the home sale market, if you will. And it was on New Year's Eve, the studio, I forget what studio, maybe it was Universal, dropped Wicked on digital on New Year's Eve. And I remember reading an article shortly after that about how much money they made, because everybody who didn't want to go out bought Wicked on New Year's Eve. I mean, we did in my house. We bought it. We watched it with our daughter, and we had a great time. But they made millions of dollars because they dropped it at the right time. Now, you don't have, 40 New Year's Eves throughout the year. You kind of have to pick and choose where you're going to be. But I was like, there is still an element of that could exist if you have the right timing, I suppose.
There is, and if you have the right kind of product that people are going to want to have a piece of, and dropping it on New Year's Eve which I think was only really like maybe a month or change after it had opened in
Yeah.
theaters, which is kind of like incentivizing audiences at home, like, oh wow, this is like still playing in theaters and I can watch it here on this special night. Like that helps. But for so many other films, that VOD streaming model, it just doesn't compensate for that loss of the DVD market, which still exists as again in a very like narrow kind of format. It's really just collectors who are looking for that. But there used to be a time when people would go out and buy tons of DVDs every week just of new releases, whatever they happen to miss. Yeah, exactly. No, I have it right here, but that is sadly gone.
Yeah, no, it really is. So I want to skip ahead a little bit here because we'll first just reference this because you mentioned already that the first movie was supposed to be a vehicle for Paul Walker. So when he signed the contract, he signed a 2-movie deal, which is largely why he was in Too Fast, Too Furious. If people follow the story at all, they know Vin Diesel had some contract issues. He didn't want to do it. He wanted more money. So that didn't really work out for him. But then we get to the third one. Walker's out, Diesel's out. And I just think it's fascinating that they were like, we still got to keep doing this. Like, to me, that would have been the point where they just took it to straight to DVD and said, forget it. We're not doing the big theatrical thing anymore. We're just going to go straight to DVD with this product. But they said, no, we're still going to go all in on this. And it worked.
Yeah, I mean, there were initial discussions very early on when they were thinking about the third movie about making it a straight to DVD product, like some of their other franchises at Universal, Bring It On series, for instance, American Pie. I mean, those went on to spawn, I don't even know how many, like, totally forgotten straight to DVD.
I think I own all of them, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, Eugene Levy and his agent, I'm sure, are very happy. I don't know who else really is about those movies, but so there was one point where they were going to do that, but then Justin Lin came along. They were very impressed with his work on Better Luck Tomorrow and then Annapolis, which was his first studio feature. And they decided to globalize it. They decided to diversify. And they had a feeling that, okay, if we can kind of take this outside of America, then maybe we could have kind of a franchisable element here, like Fast and Furious Tokyo. Okay, but what about Fast and Furious Mexico City or something like that? And they put the money into it, like a shockingly high amount, the highest budget that the Fast films had at that point, into Tokyo Drift.
Yeah, unfortunately, they didn't make as much money as they were hoping on it. It was, I think it was the worst performer of the three of them, which made me kind of surprised they even went on to a fourth. Like, you would think you invested all that money. I think Tokyo Drift is better than what people give it credit for. I do think there's some really cool stuff in that film. But yeah, when you look at it, it sort of seemed like the nail in the coffin for the franchise.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a excuse me, I'm a big Tokyo Drift defender.
Yeah,
it is definitely, since I've worked on this book, I've come to appreciate it more, and it's climbed up the rankings for me in the Fast first. But yeah, it did theatrically underperform. But again, the DVD sales were big, and it had a very healthy afterlife on cable television, and where people started to discover it and rewatch it. And that last 30 seconds of the movie in which Vin Diesel does come back, it reignited such a huge interest in the franchise that they decided to give it one more go with the fourth film. And they thought, okay, maybe this could be something nice to cap it off or be a nice little, moneymaker. And then it overperforms to an astounding degree.
Which is funny to me, too, because I was really big into the first three. And then maybe it was just the point in my life that I was at that time, or the age or whatever was going on. But I didn't even know they made a fourth one until I started seeing advertisements for Fast 5. And I said, wait a second, I missed something here. Something happened and I didn't see it. So I had to go back and find it so I could watch it before Fast 5. And it did seem like the fourth one, they really just found their rhythm. Like, after three movies, they were like, okay, this is who we are now. And it was a really fascinating film. I thought it was such a great bridge to get into what would then become sort of the, if you will, modern era of Fast and Furious movies.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember seeing the trailer for 4, and what the Universal marketing department did was really clever, is that they kind of masked that it was a Fast and Furious movie until like the very end of that trailer. Like, there were two different versions produced. One featured like a cop chase, like a foot chase through the streets of LA, and one featured the hijacking that happens at the beginning of the film of the big oil tanker in the Dominican Republic. And then only once those scenes are kind of done, Do you see like the face of Paul Walker or the face of Vin Diesel, and then bring them all together? And it had that brilliant marketing tagline, which was "New model, original parts."
Yes.
Kind of bringing all through. And I remember sitting in a theater watching that, and people were like freaking out. People who probably had never thought about Fast and Furious or had not thought about it certainly in many, many years. And it was, yeah, it was wonderful to see that resurgence there.
I mean, talk about resurgence. I mean, Fast Five just took it to a whole new world. I mean, you bring in The Rock. I remember at the time, The Rock had done something else recently too, and they started calling him franchise Viagra because when he entered into a franchise, he made the stock shoot straight up as it was going. I mean, Fast Five just, I mean, it was an unreal movie, kind of stepped away from a bit of the stuff that we knew and loved about the Fast and Furious franchise and turned it more into like a heist, like Ocean's 11 style kind of thing. But it kind of needed that shot in the arm to keep going. They needed to change something up, right?
Yeah, I mean, they thought, okay, with four, they had kind of hit a ceiling in terms of like what the audience was for a street racing movie. So like we need to amp it up. We need to make it a little bit more all audience friendly. So what is a very popular genre to do that? The heist film.
Mm-hmm.
So let's make it more of a heist movie. Let's make it international a little bit more, and let's add The Rock to it to like get that nice big leading man alpha energy in there. And originally, that it was going to go in a very different direction. They had always thought that there would be this lawman after the crew chasing them, across around the world, but more in like a old west type guy, like a sheriff or like a Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive,
Mm-hmm.
like a kind of hangdog guy who's just like determined and dogged. And Vin Diesel had mused about getting Tommy Lee Jones to play that character. But then The Rock was looking for exactly like another franchise to add his dose of Viagra to, and he had become friendly with the Universal regime. Movie magic happened.
It really is magical. Actually, my favorite dad joke, if you will, right now that I use around my house is I'll say, "Put your funderwear on." I still take that from Fast Five and The Rock. I will definitely give him credit for that. But I also wonder sometimes when I look at the franchise, yeah, I mean, they've had 5 more movies since then. But at the same time, it almost feels like that was the turning point that wasn't as good because now they started looking at how do we up our game? How do we make, I mean, we just drove safe through the middle of Brazil and ruined everything. So what do we do that's bigger for the next film? And that seems to be the challenge they've faced moving forward is bigger, bigger, bigger. But at what point does it become ridiculous?
Yeah, I mean, there's always like a knowing wink with the fast filmmakers. They know they are being ridiculous, but they still want to ground it in some semblance of reality.
Yes.
At the same time, I think if you pull the fast fandom, 99.9% of them will say five is their favorite. That is certainly like the high watermark of the franchise. And yeah, they did create like their own great problem for themselves. And like, okay, how do we possibly one up this? So then we have, six with cars taking down an airplane. We have seven cars jumping from skyscraper to skyscraper. Eight, we have like cars battling a nuclear submarine in a frozen Russian sea, and then nine when they go to space, which is I know we're jumping ahead of ourselves here, but that is one of the most polarizing moments of the franchise, to be sure. So
Yeah.
it has been a blessing and a curse. Their hunger for extremes.
I also think, not to harp on five for too long, but I also think five had a major impact on movies in general. And you're a bigger movie guy than I am. But I even think about how Fast Five seems to have had a resurgence with Mission Impossible movies. Like I think that movie gave a lot of studios the chance to say, oh my gosh, we can do stuff like this and people like it. It made the fans amped up for the big bad action movie that they hadn't really seen so much of. It seemed like it was a resurgence in a lot of ways, not just for the Fast franchise, but for films in a lot of ways.
Exactly. I mean, so, five does a lot of very interesting things. As you say, like the Mission Impossible element, it's bringing all those characters from all the different movies before it who never interacted necessarily and maybe weren't even in kind of the same continuity. They brings them all together, unites them as a super team. So we have really kind of the beginnings of like the cinematic universe building, which has become the template for so many franchises over the years. And this, Fast was doing this really before Marvel. I mean, Fast Five came out more than a year before the first Avengers. It's very obvious that its influence is extended there. It extended into the Mission Impossible franchise with Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt, bringing all those different characters back, and keeping the team as a whole. Whereas the previous editions, it was always a new set of players in the IMF team. So its influence was pretty widely felt.
There's an interesting story. You mentioned continuity. There's an interesting story about Quentin Tarantino in this when you're talking about continuity, and he almost had a little bit of a hand in that. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, so I mean, so Quentin Tarantino was not had not really been exposed to the series before, but he was going to be looking for a new editor after the passing of his regular editor, Sally Menke. Fred Raskin, who had edited the third, fourth, and fifth Fast films, was going up for that job. Him and Quentin got to talking, and Quentin decided to revisit or visit the Fast and Furious films, and then was started to like furiously Facebook messaging Fred saying like, whoa, wait a minute. So Han dies in 3, but he's back in 4, and now we're at 5. And he's like, yeah, it's like, 4 and 5 technically take place before 3. And he's like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then Fred was hired the next day to be his, de facto editor, and went on to do Django Unchained and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So yeah, Quentin Tarantino, big Fast fan.
Yeah, I mean, if you get the thumbs up from Quentin Tarantino and you're a film series like Fast and Furious, that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. So you mentioned the car in space, and I do think for me that was kind of the point where I was like, okay. Like I understand there's a lot of unrealistic stunts in a lot of these, like the cars that come out of the plane and they have the parachutes and they land on a road, a winding mountain road. But at the same time, even when you see it, you're like, this would never happen, but it's plausible, right? Like maybe, but when they go into space, you're like, no, I'm sorry. Like this, you guys, you've jumped the shark. So I think I'm with the fandom on this. That was kind of a moment for me.
Yeah, I and before I started working on the book, I probably would have put myself in that camp as well. But after talking with so many people who were involved in F9 and revisiting it, I've come around to it. Not only will I say like the filmmakers, did consult NASA about whether something like this was even possible, and they got some pretty interesting answers. But it is reflective of that moment for the franchise itself. That space scene in which Tyrese Gibson and Ludacris's characters of Roman and Tej are up in space, looking down on Earth, reflecting on how far they have come as two guys from the ghetto, as they call themselves, now in outer space, is very much a moment of the Fast filmmakers looking back upon themselves and wondering like, okay, we started as this very street level, B movie car street racing thing. And now we have transcended the blockbuster heavens to become this, global phenomenon. Love it or hate that moment. It's speaking to something a little bit greater than just absurdity for the sake of absurdity.
There's so much drama involved in this series too, and we're not going to get into too much of it because I think I lose you here in a few minutes, but the book really chronicles that so well, and I thought it was, I think you hear rumors when you're a fan, like you hear rumors on the blogs or whatever about what's going on behind the scenes, but to hear it more from the people that were involved was really interesting. And I wonder, obviously Vin Diesel has done fine in his life and he's living a perfectly fine life right now. He'll be well off and his family will be well off forever, but I wonder if he looks back sometimes and goes, man, I left a lot of money on the table just being a dick.
I would wonder that too, but again, like he has more money than several gods.
That's true.
So I'm sure he's doing fine. I mean, the kind of genius negotiating skills of Vin Diesel is if he didn't play such a game of hardball with part 2 and refusing to come back, then he wouldn't have been further wooed to come back for part 3. And as part of the negotiations for that very small cameo at the end of Tokyo Drift, he got producing powers on the franchise going forward, which gave him untold amounts of money and, more importantly, a degree of creative control over the franchise that helped him steer it to become like the Vin Diesel show. And that's not just because of the awful tragic passing of Paul Walker, but you see it in 5 and 6 and 7, and certainly going forward, it is very tilted toward Dom versus toward the Brian kind of character. So it has become the Vin Diesel show. And yeah, and as you say, he's done very, very well for himself.
Let's take a look at Fast X, because Fast X is the last thing that we saw that came out in 2023. And I'll be honest, I was not a huge fan. It just seemed like they tried too hard. They tried to put too many people in. Jason Momoa really ruined it for me. I like him too, but his character, I just could not. I don't know. There was something about the character that was too much for me anyway. But yeah, I mean, it didn't do as well as they were hoping. And now here we are in this limbo world. Can you talk about that? Like, what are the studios thinking from that film? I would think they'd want to wrap it up, but I guess maybe they're like, is it worth it?
I mean, I think there's a sense that everybody would prefer to wrap this up in some fashion. You know, when you design a movie like Fast X, which, you know, ends on a very deliberate note of uncertainty, that, you know, audience would presume would be answered in relatively speedy fashion. You know, you just don't do that if the plan was just to cut it off at its legs right there. But that said, you know, as you just mentioned, it did not make enough money as they thought it would, or that it really needed to. You know, by some reports, this movie had a production budget of about $450 million, which would make it one of, if not the most expensive movie of all time. And that's not even considering the marketing, which was huge, expansive, huge. And so after that, there was a lot of chatter about, okay, this thing has gotten too huge. It has too many people, too many stars. They go too many places around the world. The visual effects budget is insane. Let's bring it back down to earth. Let's make it, you know, a little bit more in line with those earlier movies where it's a little bit more grounded, a little bit grittier. We can stay in maybe one or two locations instead of bringing a whole circus around the world. And then, you know, things kind of froze. And from my understanding, is that basically, and this is kind of an underreported story, but it's been out there, is that Vin Diesel was sued for sexual assault as a civil lawsuit. That case was going to go before a jury trial initially in the summer, this past summer, August of 2025. That's been now pushed into February of 2026, as last I understand it. Of course, he's denied all of these allegations in the press, so nothing has been proven in front of court. But my understanding is, until that matter is settled one way or the other, the studio is not going to greenlight or go forward with any one plan of how to finish this franchise off or continue it. And again, maybe everything, you know, works out in Vin Diesel's favor and they do this one final big movie and they say that's it. You know, if it does well enough, that's never really the end. If it breaks all kinds of box office records, they will find another way to do another. But this is all right now conjecture, because nothing has been greenlit, nothing is in production, and, you know, the clock is ticking. Fans will only be so patient to find out what happened to all their favorite characters for so long before they start to care less about those characters and move on.
That is the trick, because I think, you know, in earlier years of the franchise, you had 3-ish years in between most of the films, 2 to 3 years. So a film not coming out until 2026 or early 2027 maybe is not unthinkable for this franchise, but the times are different. Our attention spans are way shorter. I already forgot that it was 2 years ago that movie came out. I thought it was last year, but no, I mean, it was 2023. So we're talking over 2 years ago that movie came out. I mean, so I think if they are going to do it, it's time to try to dive in and get something rolling. But I also understand the legal stuff. It's hard to battle with that. I get it.
Yeah. I mean, right now, I think like the earliest fans could hope to see a sequel would be 2027.
Yeah.
Which, you know, considering, the 2023 to 2027 gap, that's a sizable one.
Very big gap. You mentioned in the book here towards the end, you talk about that video that came out a little earlier this year. I think it was Vin Diesel, where he talks about bringing the movie back to the streets of LA, especially after the fires that took place in Los Angeles. You know, he's talking about we need to, you know, bring it back here as a shot in the arm to the industry, to help out our friends that have been a part of the movie for so long, that lost everything in the fires, things like that. I had thought it would be cool to get, if this was going to be the last movie, right? to kind of strip it down a little bit and kind of go back to that formula from, say, the first movie, where it's still exciting and it still gets your heart pumping, but you don't have as much of the ridiculous stunts. But at the same time, I don't know how you do it when you've got all that stuff happening in Fast X. I mean, what do you do with all those extra characters? You got to find a way to kill them off or write them off in some way, because you can't have all these people in LA at the same time.
It would be a lot. It would be a lot. And as we see, there's a jet carrying about half of those characters that crashes into a mountain, and we don't know who survives that or what happens there. I mean, those are some important characters franchise-wise in that jet. But yeah, it is a good question. And what do you do with Jason Momoa's character? What do you do with The Rock, who at the very end of Fast X was teased as finally being back in the franchise? There are some side characters that exist. Brie Larson. Where's Kurt Russell, who wasn't even really part of Fast X? If you want to close it off for fans, you're going to have to give them some sort of sense of closure. And that's going to cost money, and that's going to be complicated. So how do you stuff all of that? How do you stuff 25 years worth of story building into one more grounded, more street level film? It'd be a huge challenge.
I think about Stranger Things a little bit with this too. And I remember, I'm going to say kids because I know they're younger than me, but a couple of the kids have expressed over the years, they're like, it's ridiculous that none of us have died. Like all the things that have happened to us on this show and none of us have died. It's absurd that we keep introducing characters and we're all still here. And I kind of feel that way about the Fast franchise. Like, I'm not wishing ill on any of these characters, but at some point, something has to happen. I know Paul Walker, but he didn't die in the franchise. He's still living somewhere, as far as we know.
Still, canonically, Brian O'Connor is alive in that universe. And one of the controversial things that Vin said recently, appearing at a automotive cultural event this past summer, was that the next one's going to have Brian O'Connor and Dom Toretto like back again, back at it, which left a lot of people going, huh? So whether they accomplish that via, maybe recasting one of Paul Walker's brothers, Cody or Caleb, who helped fill in on Part 7, or whether that's through a total digital VFX creation, aided possibly by AI, is another. The sentiment out there in the fan community does not seem to want this at all. Kind of let Brian rest, let Paul rest. So, a lot of people are very nervous about what that might or might not look like.
I like to think that he would, Vin that is, would take that into consideration and say, you know what, we've heard from the fans, we feel good about this, we're going to leave it and just kind of let Brian live his life out in the franchise the way it is. To wrap this up, I want to go back. I didn't write down the person's name, but I still think it's fascinating. This whole thing started because of a magazine article, and that person barely got any credit for even inspiring this entire thing. And I just wonder if at some point someone ever sent him like a gift basket or something just to say thank you, because it's crazy how much money they've made off of this article.
Oh, yeah. And so his name is Kenneth Lee.
Thank you.
And he is a New York City journalist, still working in journalism in New York for Reuters right now. And great guy, had a great conversation with him, a long while back. And he got a good amount of money for the option of this Vibe magazine article that was published in 1999. But he got the tiniest of credits in the first film that is only like you'd have to sit through the end credits till the very end, that said partially, I think it's partially inspired by a magazine article by Kenneth Lee. And his name does not appear anywhere in the sequels. And he was never on set. He has never met Vin Diesel. He's never met Paul Walker. He never met Rob Cohen. Never met any of the cast. He did, I believe, finagle his way to the premiere party for that very first one, which his agent had kind of snuck into the contract if it had become a movie. No, I don't think anybody has sent him a gift basket. If any listeners are out there who want to send him a gift basket, look him up through Reuters in New York. You can find him. I know he's been a Jeopardy clue He's told me that his niece thinks he's cool. But yeah, no, he's not palling around with Vin in Malibu or anything like that.
Well, that's all you need. If you're a Jeopardy clue and your niece thinks you're cool, you're set for life as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Barry, listen, I don't think that I ever thought that I needed this book, but after reading it, it's amazing. Like, to think about the 10 movies, everything that's happened over the last 25, 26 years with the production of these films, the drama, like almost losing it at some point. I mean, really fascinating stuff. It's a big book, but it's really cool stuff. So coming out at the right time, too, for anybody who's got a Fast and Furious fan in your life, this might be a great Christmas gift. The book, again, is called Welcome to the Family, the explosive story behind Fast and Furious, the blockbusters that supercharged the world. Barry, where can people go if they want to find out more info about you, if they want to learn more about what you're doing? I'd love to share that.
Sure, yeah. So the book's available anywhere you buy your books and audiobooks, and you can find all of my writing for my day job at the Globe and Mail newspaper, which is Canada's leading national daily newspaper. I'm based in Toronto. Type my name and the Globe and Mail, and you will find my author page there. I am also on X/Twitter. I am there probably too much, posting about all my movie opinions and Fast and Furious promotion. I'm on Instagram, I am on Blue Sky, and I'm on Letterboxd. Just look up Barry Hertz, BARRYHERTZ, and you will find me.
Barry, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking this project in and giving us this. I love it so much. Barry, I appreciate your time, man.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Big thank you to Barry Hertz for his time. His book, Welcome to the Family, the explosive story behind Fast and Furious, the blockbusters that supercharged the world, is available now. It's coming out at the perfect time if you're in the market for a holiday gift for someone. And thank you to all of you for your time today. I always appreciate the fact that you share some of your time with me. Until next week, be well.